co-host, we think. Yeah. Fuck me. Should we just try and respect each other? Should we try not to comment on each other's looks or anything else as well? Please don't message anyone. This is not a pick-up place. Hello, South0112 from Georgia, USA, and on the BC, Canada. Do you two know each other? That's what you get, don't you, when you say from England as well?
Canada's a pretty small place.
I know. Every time you go to, I find it every time I'm at Disney or I'm in the States, oh my God, I have a friend in London. And I'm like, no, I don't. It's the same. Oh my God, you both come from Canada, you must know each other. It's so fucking facetious, isn't it? It's terrible. Terrible. We have mutuals, actually. That's the way.
Well, they're probably both kinky, that's why. It's a smaller world.
It's a very small world where we come from, isn't it? Hi, Mike. Nice to meet you. So what I was saying was please be kind to each other. Please be nice. Please be civil. Please be pleasant. It really matters. Just be nice to people. I know it's quite hard. And let's really try and make sure we do that today. This isn't a place for wanking. This isn't a place for anything else as well. Jerry is my co-host. If he sees you wanking, you'll be straight out. Look, you maybe want some humiliation if that's...
Unless it's funny, yeah.
You maybe want some humiliation or something, but, you know... We have had 4 wankers, I think, over the years, 3 or 4, and we get a load of people coming in. Sometimes somebody sends the link to Twitter. I don't know why, but some people do. Hi, Zygology. Is it Zygology or Zygology? Zygology. I just fucked up completely. I'm giving up. Mama Foxy, wait, we're supposed to have respect and common decency. I know. Oh, I don't know about that. It's almost like having things like boundaries. I know. Oh, look, got people meeting each other at events this weekend. How exciting. Right, so what are we talking about today? So as I said, this is being recorded. It goes on YouTube and it will go on FetLife as well. So please be aware that your names are showing or your faces are showing. So if you don't want that, please change it. Change your face if you are worried about it. And some of you might need to, like me, to change my face. It's not a good look. So I'm talking about emotions this year. So for those of nice to see you. Hello, Rose. Nice to see you too. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Deb. I facetiously call myself the kink shrink. It's supposed to take the piss a bit, really, but it's become a bit more serious for some reason. I am a therapist. That is what I do for a living. I see people from all over the world. I'm very lucky, very privileged. I'm very busy. I write a lot on FetLife. I really believe in giving back. I am at London Alternative Market every once a month, and I've done talks all around the place, really, internationally and nationally. Again, very lucky, very privileged. There's no such thing as an expert on kink. They don't exist. Even somebody who has a PhD in some form of kink, it's a very tiny part of kink. Really, really small part. So it's really important to realise that. And there are differences when you go and see a therapist as to whether they're kink aware, kink knowledgeable, kink friendly, kink active. Ask, find out what it's all about. The idea of these workshops is they started in lockdown and people wanted them to carry on, so I try and do them every other week as much as I can, unless I'm really tired, ill, or something else happens. But I try and stick to it as much as I can. Today, I'm going to be talking about emotions. Why? Because a lot of people in my therapy room seem to be really flooded with them at the moment. People have got situations where they're having breakups, where they're having makeups, where they're not finding someone, where they just can't deal with their stuff in relationships, in polycules, in different things as well. So if you want to know about my credentials as far as kink goes, I've been a kinky fucker for 40 years. I mean, that's about as good as it gets, mixed with my qualifications and other things as well. But you can take the odd course, but. So I'm very opinionated, as people know, and I say it how it is. So just so you know, that is my style. It's my style in therapy as well, actually. So we're talking about emotions today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about emotions, where they come from, what they are, what they mean. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can do to help ourselves, where they're felt in the body, have a little bit of understanding, and I'm going to send you all an info link for that one as well, because that's a piece of research that I really love. I'm going to talk a little bit about some Lisa Feldman's research about the fact that emotions are often guesses. We're going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Gottmans and how they work. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we then handle emotions. We're going to talk about distress tolerance. We're going to talk about our capacity to manage. And I'm going to give some techniques and some other bits and pieces as we go through that. And then I'm going to talk about people who maybe don't feel emotions and people who overfeel emotions. And then I think I'm going to end with jealousy a little bit. So let's look at that emotion. However, jealousy is just one of many emotions. So let's start with an overall view of emotions. And please, if you want to say anything, write it down the side. I will read it out. And if I miss anything, honestly, Joey tells me off. So it's all great. He's very good at
Spanking.
You've never spanked me, no. Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? I've got.
We don't mesh in any way, Kitten.
Oh, thanks. Well, I've just been dumped online. No, I haven't been given this. Jerry is a great friend. I think everyone thinks, and it's so interesting what people think. I've got the same with Poppy. I've got the same with Cosmic. I'm sure with Jerry. People think we have some kind of sexual history in the past. I can honestly say I was never a Girl Scout, but I'll nick their honour because I don't have any myself, clearly. But, I've never had any interaction physically with any of them, which is quite interesting. Apart from paying once for Cosmic, I think he was doing he was raising money for charity once. He wanted to get, well, he didn't want to get spanked. Who knows? He might have done actually. But don't think he did. So Cosmic is the guy that runs London Alternative Market. And this was a long, long time ago. It was about 15, maybe not that long, I don't know. Maybe 10, 12 years ago. And people were trying to raise money. And he put the price really high. And I was feeling really wealthy that day. So I paid the extra £200 just to make sure it happened. It was worth every penny. Even I didn't really see it because I had to go home. But, put your money where your arse is what I say. Okay. Drinking hot chocolate as we go. Oh, I live such an exciting life. It's crazy. Let's talk about emotions. Why do we have them? What are they? How do they work? Because they really are the bane or the joy of our existence, I think. And I think they're really important in kink. I think they're really important in relationships. I think they're really important in polyamory because they're really important to us as human beings. And a lot of the time when people come in to see me, they're moaning about somebody else's emotions or their own emotions that have impacted them. And then what can they do? And it helps us hold boundaries, it helps us negotiate, it helps us do a lot of things, or it gets in the way of those things because it is emotions that hurt us 9 times out of 10. So in psychology, when we talk about emotions, we talk about a complex state of feeling, really, in a way, although we'll come back to that in a minute, where we get physical and psychological responses that impact our thoughts and behaviour. So you can have a look at emotionality with psychological phenomena as well. You can have a look at sort of like whether it's our mood, our temperament, our motivation, our personality, or it can be mental health issues as well. So it really varies. There are physiological theories around emotions. There are neurological theories around emotions, and there are cognitive theories around emotions as well. What's the difference in those? So physiological is that the body is responsible for our emotions. Neurological is the brain leads to emotional response, and cognitive is that our thinking and our thoughts play a massive part in our emotions. And there's some history around that. So you go back to Darwin around this, you go back to evolutionary theories around emotion when you look really, really way back. And his theory was that human beings have to be adaptive, and in order to survive and reproduce, we seek mates and all of those things, that all those excuses of all those poor cis men who have to sow their oats. We go back to that evolutionary type theory. Sorry, cis men who have to sow their oats. That was Darwin's point, that he turned around and said that it's an adaptive role that we have to create in order to be okay, if that makes sense. I'm not quite sure that's supposedly true. I don't think anyone has to have sex, for example. I don't think it's just about that. So that doesn't gel with any of my theories. We then have James Lang theories. So you had Carl Lang and William James, who turned around and said that emotions occur because of a physiological reaction to an event. So the idea is that I see something in front of me that scares me, therefore I feel frightened. And because of the physical reactions that I have, but it's the interpretation that I'm going through, that I'm looking at something, it's making me feel frightened, therefore I have to do something about that. So if you saw something and you're really scared, that the Lang theory or the James Lang theory would say that you're not trembling because you're frightened, you feel frightened because you're trembling, if that makes sense. So see which ones you agree with as well. Another physiological theory that came on was Cannon Bard. Again, so Walter Cannon really disagreed with the James Lang theory, and he turned around and he suggested that people have physiological responses to things that aren't emotional at all, like our hearts racing, not being able to breathe properly. Your heart might race because you're really excited about seeing somebody, or you're sexually turned on by somebody, or that you are frightened of somebody. So his theory was that doesn't really happen, that emotional responses happen really, really quickly, so they can't just be about physical states. So you'll feel afraid and then you'll start to experience some physical symptoms. So again, slightly different. That theory also talks about the brain a little bit more in neuroscience. So we talk about that the thalamus sends a message to the brain in response to a stimulus. So again, it's about stimulus. And again, I'm going to come on to a few things that might not have a look at any of these at all. You've then got the Schachter-Singer theory. That's more cognitive. So basically, it says that emotion suggests our thoughts are responsible for our emotions. So again, we think something, we've learned something, therefore we feel in a certain way. So, and then of course, we've got basic cognitive appraisal theory. Did anybody want a psychology lesson? Bella, do you? You might want to. It might anyone else, a psychologist do. We're just doing too many of this. It's so boring, isn't it, sometimes? But let's look at the basics because it helps us work with it. And the cognitive appraisal theory says that your brain first appraises a situation, and once it's appraised it, the resulting response is an emotion. I take one bloody week away from my reading and studying psychology. That's the only reason I'm saying that. And then we have the facial feedback theory of emotion, and that turns around and says that that our emotions are tied to changes in facial muscles. So if we smile and we keep smiling, we'll probably have a better time. Oh, I'm glad it's interesting. Thank you. So that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we often say that, take it till you make it, pretend. And so again, all of those phrases that you hear are all based in these theories as such. So I find that quite interesting that we've got all these theories that whether it's thoughts, whether it's responses, whether it's external, whether it's our brain, whether it's our body. And actually the answer is in all of those somewhat. However, Lisa Feldman's piece of research, which I'm going to come on to a little bit later, is probably one of the most interesting in the most recent history because it's really scientific and it might surprise you what she says if you don't already know. Bella, do you know Lisa Feldman's piece of research? You might do. Granted, this is much better than my lectures. Yeah. So isn't it interesting? So if we're in kink or polyamory, what comes first? Are we born that way? Are we created that way? Is it because of our environment? It's really interesting because more and more research is starting to prove that we're probably born this way more than we are made or created this way. However, it hasn't quite followed the full structure through yet, so we don't know. Let's have a little look about the...
A friend of mine described herself as born deviant, and the specific deviant, the tendency for deviation is there, the deviancy, and the specific deviation is developed as you grow older.
Well, And I think that's one of the major arguments, isn't it? It's the whole nature nurture. And I would argue, and if you some people, if you've never met me before, a lot of people play bingo with me because I say some words continuously. I'm about to say one of those words again. So a lot of people argue that who we are is genetic, and I would argue that it is genetic. It's also epigenetic. Bingo. And I would also argue that it is due to our environment. There's lots of proof around this nowadays where you take even the most amazing professors who turn around and said, it's definitely this way, and they've been proven wrong even by themselves, for themselves, by mistakes that they've made, especially when it comes to things like fMRIs, but that's a whole other conversation. One interesting person I really like is an anthropologist called Paul Ekman, which some of you might have heard of if you like things like Lie to Me. Anyone here like those sort of crime series and dramas? So Lie to Me is really interesting. And he turned around, yes, so do I love the series Lie to Me, but I also like Ekman. And you can buy apps around Ekman as well, so people have heard of him. Great. So he's an anthropologist in the 70s, and he turned around and said that we have 6 basic emotions. Anger, fear, surprise, disgust, joy, and sadness. I think everybody said scared, content, disgust, surprise. Yeah. So those 6. Belladonna, it's hard to suppress a lot of my deviation, which suggests to me that it's something that I was born to be. Yeah, or if a theorist was arguing with you, they might turn around and say, but you can't suppress it because you haven't learned any other way yet. There's always going to be an argument, and you'll say, no, that's not true, not true. And then we have those arguments, don't we? Which is great to have as well. I like those arguments. Sally says, makes me think, Lady Gaga. No, I can't try again. My watch has been listening to me the whole time. Who trusts technology? Makes me think Lady Gaga, Baby I Was Born This Way, but feel it's a mix. It's a good mix of Baby I Was Born This Way. Should we put it that way? Should we turn it around a little bit? Almost innate. Yeah, I totally understand that. So, although he turned around and said that there are 6, lots of people say that there are roughly 4, happy, angry, sad, scared, and other people count at least 27 forms of very basic emotions that we are born with. And then we also have the argument, is that in every human culture? Ekman believes that it is. So Ekman believes that if you go around the world, you can see these 6 emotions on anybody's face. So what we know is that emotion is a topic that's difficult to pin down, it's controversial, people believe different things, so it's also going to be about what do you believe. However, we do know that emotions do come from distinct parts of our brain as well. So if you look at emotions, the brain structures that are used the most are the amygdala, which is those little wishbone-shaped bits that kind of come up from the top of your spine where we join the brain at the back, so it comes round. You've got the insula or the insular cortex and your midbrain structure, which is kind of in the middle, a little bit lower, which is your periaqueductal brain. So those are the main structures that kind of create or influence or integrate emotion, emotional behavior, and motivation, because motivation can be argued that it is actually a feeling that we get, and that's very much going to be the amygdala. I'm guessing that the research was done on neurotypical people. I wonder how much of it applies to neurodivergent people. Not enough, not yet. However, it is starting to come. It is starting to be there. And I will go on to neurodivergency as we go through as well. So, because you're also talking to somebody who, I don't have a formal diagnosis, I'll never get one, I don't need one. I've seen a doctor, I've seen a psychologist, and they all agree that I also have ADHD. I mean, that's why I can do things like this. My energy is always really high. That's the sort of ADHD that I have. Boom, talk too fast. Here we go. Lots of things to focus on. Whoosh. And it's quite handy sometimes because I actually do think I can multitask. Of course I can't. I just think I do. My brain tells me I can. But I'm highly structured, and I'm so structured to try and counteract the lack of structure, if that makes sense. Everything's got its place. When I look at my issues around weight or OCD, they're actually ADHD type behaviors. So the amygdala, that very interesting shape, it's really deep in our brains, integrates emotions, as I've said, really works on that. And it's really important for the sort of conditioning learning that we do. You know, when you can teach someone something and they get conditioned to do something, like Pavlov's dogs, or if you watch certain programs, how we do things. So if we have a repetitive exposure and a stimulus, somebody will learn. So we get a particular response. And Pavlov rang a bell, fed the dogs, rang a bell, fed the dogs, rang a bell, and the dogs salivated. So what was interesting is as soon as they just rang the bell, the dog salivated, or if they saw the particular technician that brought the food over, they salivated as well. Your insula, which is actually the really important part of your brain, because it really helps counter some of our, you know, when we get into that place when we feel really hyper, not so great, not so well, and we start to do things like hyperventilate, or we have a panic attack. So we've got our parasympathetic and our sympathetic nervous system. And when our sympathetic nervous system takes over and starts running, we can really feel out of control. The insula can really help calm us down, but it's also our source of disgust. So if we don't like the smell of something, or we don't like the taste of something, we don't like it, and that's really good. We need to be able to understand when something tastes disgusting, because actually it can save our lives. Because it used to be that a lot of poisons and a lot of things that were trying to hurt us actually don't taste very nice, so it's really important. So the insula also serves as like a diagnostic tool. It sends like a report, I suppose is the way of putting it, and says this is how it is. So we start to work out a physiological state, and that's the insula. So in the brainstem, we've got this periaqueductal grey. So at the back, and that's more about pain perception. So that's also handy for kinksters. In fact, the whole spine is really handy for kinksters. How we interpret pain and what we do. And I've run workshops on pain before, and maybe I should do another one, because it's really exciting to do workshops on pain. We can talk about how to increase it, how to decrease it, how to play games with how people respond to it as well. However, emotionally, it has incredible receptors in. So it has pain-reducing compounds in that are very similar to morphine and oxycodone, and they help us calm. So we really want that to function in our body. And actually, if we can distract ourselves in certain ways, we start to feel better around pain. It's also very important in reproductive behaviours, maternal attachment, and anxiety. That's the fucker that gets in. So it's really difficult to understand that that's the way the brain works all the time, the anatomy and how it works as well. So it also depends on the sort of parenting and family that you have. If you imagine that when somebody has a child and they are a set of volcanoes, bear with me just for a little bit, I know I'm sounding really weird right now. So if you imagine that everyone's like a volcano, and we've got baby volcanoes in the family, regardless of gender of parents or anything. Gender is totally irrelevant in this moment. I am just talking about the baby volcanoes. Depending on the smoke messages that are given from the family, depends on what sort of language these baby volcanoes learn to say. So when a parent doesn't really know how to handle emotions, they're not teaching a child how to handle emotions. They don't know how to express them. So children might then act accordingly, and they might send out the right smoke signals, but that lava on the inside is really, really, really building up in the child. And the child is having their own problems with their emotional regulation, their own emotional understanding, because everyone's speaking a different language. And that's why we talk about love languages and different things. However, emotion is a taught language. And when you look at people, for example, who are neurodivergent, the language isn't the same. So when somebody's neurodivergent, they need to develop an algorithm. So I talk about this a lot with my clients, especially when neurodivergent. We need to understand, it's an algorithm to understand, what does that mean? This emotion inside me or that emotion in you, how do I learn to see it? How do I learn to recognize it inside me as well? So unless parents are really acutely aware of that, even in neurotypical babies, it's really difficult for us to learn what our emotions are. And some emotions in some cultures aren't allowed. Let's be really, really hetero, cis, typical just for a second, just to understand this point. And that doesn't mean that I believe them. Think that way. I'm just using a very classic, not symptom, a classic story. So this makes sense. So when you have little boys, cis boys growing up, we can tell them and say it's not cool for them to cry because it's too giggly. So if we've got a little boy that cries and he's got that toxic kind of male patriarchal parent says, don't you fucking cry in my house, young man, type stuff. You know, one of those lovely parents that we've all met and had as well. So we meet that, and that kid learns not to cry when they're not feeling okay, because they have to develop a different emotion in order to do something. This link in with something like the Still Face Experiment by Edward Tronick. Yes, it very well might do. So let me just go with my flow for a second. Sorry. So if you've got that little boy that's taught, or for example, anyone here who was born a cis woman, I'll just ask you something interesting. If when you're angry, do you cry? Now, a lot of cis-born women will say yes, 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 no, feel sad, no. Statistically, most women, most of the time, will say yes, that they cry when they're angry. Why? Because one of the general messages, unless you've had really good parenting, is that girls don't get angry, it's okay to cry instead, whereas men don't cry when they're angry. Now, this isn't all the time. I never say all the time. That is not in my nature, and that's not what I believe as well, because science also proves us wrong on that. Statistically, cis-born little girls are taught that anger isn't pretty. So what we also learn from that is emotions are influenced and a different language. Hi, Andy. No worries. Come along in. Very well. Hope you are as well. So when we're taught the way to deal with emotions, we're taught in certain cultures with a big C and a small c. So certain cultures you go to, emotions are very different. Not allowed in some circumstances, very allowed in others. And the way you talk to people and you do things. Deference, respect, maybe in certain cultures, where other cultures you'll find outbursts of emotions that are verbal and aggressive and awesome and full of life, especially in death, when you've got people warbling and throwing themselves over coffins really loudly. Whereas if you go to a typical English funeral, you're lucky if you can just dab an eye because it's not the expected thing. So culturally, emotions are also taught to us as well. There are also very different types of parents that teach emotions. Emulsions? Fucking hell, I have an emulsion on me. That teach emotions, Jesus Christ. So the Gottmans talk about 4 stereotypical type of parents. So you've got the more dismissing parent. So when you've got a dismissive parent, what you've got there is somebody who disengages, who ridicules, and curbs all negative emotions. It's fine if you're happy, it's not okay, for God's sake. So there's lots of uncertainty and fear around those parents. They use distraction techniques. They see that negative emotions, it's funny how we see emotions as negative and positive, because actually I don't. I think they're all rather fucking awesome and pretty cool. And what we know is that when we cry and when we feel certain emotions, we get certain hormonal releases. And that means if we get those hormonal releases, that we actually start to feel better. It's the release that we need. But we're still teaching some children not to cry, not to feel angry, because it's not attractive or it's aggressive. And I'm very much a believer when it comes to emotions, that we need to teach people that there's a difference between the feeling and the doing, if you like. So like verbs, think about it differently. You have every right to be angry. You don't necessarily have the right to be aggressive or violent. The anger isn't the problem, it's what you do with it. The sadness isn't the problem. But if we're oversharing and we can do different things and we flood other people with our emotions, then maybe that's too much for them. And a lot of people don't want that. And I also understand that. And that can become quite toxic as well, especially if we're trauma dumping or oversharing, which some of us do some of the time. Jerry says crying can be a massive release. It's so good for us. I mean, we might get a headache, we might feel ill for a bit, but overall, it's really, really good for us. So this dismissive parent means that what the child learns is that there's something wrong with them. They don't learn how to regulate their emotions, and they feel that what they're feeling isn't appropriate, isn't right, doesn't fit, and that they can never get that right, and that maybe that's abnormal. So that's that dismissive parenting. They also recognize that there was a disapproving parent as well. The disapproving parent is similar, but way more negative, way more judgmental, way more critical, way more controlling, and very manipulative as a parent. Just thinks about discipline, consequence, got to do this, got to do that, and actually doesn't help the child meter or temper their own emotions and where they are. So it's very similar to that parent above. And then we've got, and people might not like this one, actually, because there's a lot of these around nowadays. And that is the laissez-faire, let it be, endlessly permissive parent. Whatever is okay, don't worry. Which means there's no guidance, there's no problem solving, there are no consequences, and there's no understanding. They encourage the whole riding out, and they're way and way out of it. So they've gone all the way through this. However, kids don't learn how to cope by doing that all the time. They don't learn to concentrate. They can't get on with others because they can't regulate their emotions. They're taught to just go through them. And that's terribly trendy at the moment. Let your child see it through to the end. Let your child, without teaching them any coping techniques, because actually sometimes when we're in a situation, we can't just cry it out. We can't just go through that. You can't do that with your boss. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that probably isn't the best way because the child then can't concentrate, can't focus, and can't work with it. Andy says, as a guy, I feel we build up emotions for ages, maybe years, but when we cry, the floodgates really open, just speaking from personal experience. I would say that can happen to any gender. I would say that actually sometimes if you have that very heterosis male upbringing, that surely that can happen. I'm also going to argue that people of all genders feel that as well. As a female, sadness, frustration comes out as anger and silence, not tears. So again, that's the message, Spirit, that somehow you've been taught that that's the way to do that. And that's something we should think about. Especially important to help kids with alexithymia. Yes, lots of things. I'm going to come through different things that people can have in a different way as well. So the fourth type of parent isn't so much of a common stereotype because it isn't negative. It's kind of the emotion coach, the parent who really helps their children. So you might look at it. So if you want to emotionally coach yourself or a child, when you think about it, you have to be aware of your child's emotion. You have to learn how to interpret it, look at how it makes you feel inside, recognize their expressions, if you can, on their face, and also understand that that moment is a really good time for intimacy and teaching. It's not all about telling them to stop or telling them to go ahead and no matter what, whatever they want is fine and they're okay. There is a middle answer there. So we can help that child. So we can listen, we can use empathy, we can validate, we can change a lot of things for that child. And then we can teach them to label the right emotions in the right way. You seem very sad, you seem very angry. And I have to watch that with clients sometimes. And again, I'm going to go back to Ekman. Sometimes, for me as a therapist, I can really notice that somebody is angry or somebody is sad. And I'll say, you seem very angry. But actually say, no, I'm not. I'm just frustrated or I'm a little bit sad. Because they haven't got to the core emotion underneath. Because one thing that transactionality teaches us, that is sometimes people put feelings on top of other feelings. And we call that a racket. So when people have a feeling that isn't acceptable in the family, they put another feeling on top of it. You know, like the old mafia type rackets that we used to know about. So rackets really mean you've got one business that's really good and okay, and underneath is a real emotion going on, but one covers the other. So a lot of people will use rackets like bored, tired. I'm seeing so many tired people at the moment, and I want to know, why are you tired? Because it isn't just about tiredness. Is this really about emotion? Is this something that you're feeling, that you've been taught that I'm okay, I'm just tired, I'm just a bit burnt out, are you, or are you feeling sad or angry or frustrated?
But in the same way that we don't know whether my perception of red is the same as your perception of red, how do we know that my perception of anger equates to your perception of anger?
With a conversation. So if you're starting with a child, it's the same with anything. And again, this is really important to me in polyamory, in monogamy, and in kink. What we need to do is define words. When I work with couples or polycules, one of the problems is they don't understand the rules that they've got for each other. It might be that somebody says in monogamy, I want you to be faithful. I don't fucking know what faithful means. I know what the dictionary means it to be, but I don't know what your faithful means. I might not even know what my faithful means. And that's really important for us to find out. You seem angry. Like, what do you feel like? What are you feeling in your body? What's going on for you? Would you define that as anger? Like, when I'm working with neurodivergent children, like especially quite young ones who haven't been taught how to deal with these things, is I need to help them label what they're actually feeling and label as correctly or as close to as we can so that they can manage. So it's been a conversation. Like, what's red for you takes a conversation between us. However, people make fucking huge assumptions around other people's okayness, around their emotions, that they can cope. I look like someone who can completely cope and I'm always okay. It's not fucking true, is it? Nobody can do that. So people make incredible assumptions around my wellness, my okayness, my everything about me, because that's the impression that I give. But that's also the impression I've been taught to give. So what we're trying to help people do with conversations or with understanding is understand what is me that's presenting or what is my persona that's presenting. Those masks and those different things over the years. So it takes really good conversations. And I think that's why therapy can be really good for some people. It helps you define your emotions and where you are. Because when you can label your emotions with words, you can communicate, which makes a real difference. And you can set limits. It's really inappropriate to be in some situations to be over emotional for the world. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying there's a propriety that comes with that society judges us for. I think it's inappropriate. I went to the theatre last year. One of the times I go to the theatre quite a lot. I'm watching the fucking Prince of Egypt and a cunt behind me, and I really mean that, answers his fucking phone. The rage in me was unbelievable. I just bought 6 people £90 tickets, and this cunt behind me is on the phone. Now, of course, my British sensibility, I'm sitting on my fucking tongue and I'm sitting on my hands. Also, I'm sitting on my hands and my tongue because my children know me. Every single one of them, 4 of them, with 3 of their partners, all turned around and looked at me, or 4 of their partners, can't remember at the time, I went, don't you dare, because they know that I will say something. So I'm like, oh. And it's really hard, isn't it? But I said, I'm so angry. And I think it really helps us to communicate when we know the right word for the feeling that we're having, and it helps us solve problems as well. Parada said, I felt horrible during and after crying, never felt any relief. Sometimes we don't see it through, and if you've been taught that crying isn't okay and that there's shame in crying or it's a waste of someone else's time, or that you don't quite understand that feeling, maybe because of neurodivergency, then I can really understand why that happens. And it can really frustrate and not help at all. So I really understand that. Belladonna says, me and my ex used a numerical scale of intensity of emotions. It helped a bit through clearly not enough, seeing as he's still my ex. Interestingly, it works. It works while it's working with the human being that we're with. I think it's really important in kink and polyamory, and I'm going to say this again, have an emotional safe word. A safe word is not just for play. I think we need safe words for arguments, when we need to time out, we need it to stop. Not stonewalling, stop, I'm going to come back to it, but we need an emotional safe word. This is pushing all the buttons in my mental and emotional state rather than the physical state. So I think it's really good to have a separate emotional safe word that's different to your normal safe word that's physical. And I think we should actually just use it sometimes in discussions and different things as well. So I just saw a client, by the way, if I talk about anyone, I have full permission to talk about them, who really wasn't okay and actually has certain diagnoses that I don't even want to go into, but that are so complex. And, you know, stop the conversation, and that's what she needed to do. So we both just stopped, gave her time to find out where she was, and so she could become okay. It's really important that we can communicate that. Andy says, phones in theatre should be banned. I was so angry. In the end, I did say, could you take that outside, please? See, how British was that? It was so simple.
Did you wait until the interval?
No, I didn't. I did just turn around and whisper. And then afterwards, when I saw him later, when my kids weren't with me, and I said, I would have you chucked out if it wasn't for my kids. He went, oh, fuck off. And I said, oh, so angry. Right, so do you mind? Exactly, it's so British, isn't it? Having an emotional safe word is a brilliant concept. Thank you. A lot of people have said that before me. It's not just from me, it's from many of us. It's really important that we do it. So breathe one into your repertoire. Belladonna, a lot of people think that people with BPD feel all the emotions, but as someone with BPD, I don't feel like I do. But I feel something, whatever it is. How do you learn to label emotions when you're in the process of feeling them and someone is getting angry for you not being able to label them? By learning, right? So BPD stands for borderline personality disorder, which a lot of us will argue is now emotionally unstable personality disorder. However, we'd also then relabel that as it's fucking trauma. So when we've experienced trauma and something really awful has happened to us, we maybe don't know how to label our emotions. In a bit, when I get to that, I have, because I've got this all in my head, I've got a website I'm going to link to you that shows you where activity is held physiologically. And that teaches you a lot about emotion, because when we learn where it's held physiologically, even if we're not sure about it, it's really good and really cool and important. So I will link that as well. And also, when someone's angry at you for not being able to label them, for me, I really understand that you are frustrated by my lack of ability to state what I'm feeling, and I understand that it's unusual for you, but it doesn't make your response okay or kind or generous or respectful. I need you to understand that I'm in a place where I can't do that yet. It's not as if I'm not working towards it. Or you just say, fuck off, you can't. Choose. Either are completely appropriate. An emotional safe word for non-sexual context is an amazing idea. Definitely going to start utilising that. I'm really glad, Jazz. And actually, I think you can also use it in sex and play, because sometimes, we can be having sex or we can be having an orgasm, and all of a sudden we're in floods of tears and we feel really emotional and very strong because we've relaxed, we've released, and a lot of this stuff comes out. We have an emotional safe word and then forget to use it in the heat of the moment. That's a real shame. Get used to using it. Get used to having it in your vocabulary. It's a really good idea, but it's practice. I like that too, says Andy, a separate emotional sage word, or a safe word as well. It's very sage to have a safe word. Just take the piece. Only because I know you might get away with it. I know you've corrected it. Trying to use an emotion as well. Okay, so that's something I was going to talk about as well. So although some people say there are 4 emotions, some people there are 6, and some people say there are 27, what you can get and download is an emotions wheel. You can pick one. And you can use any one you like. It doesn't matter. There are shit tons of them. A lot of them are just facing happy, angry, sad, scared, but also content, disgust, surprise in the middle of the wheel. It depends where someone goes. But other people will tell and say those lead on from other emotions. And what an emotions wheel does is it takes the core emotions and it builds up all the other emotions that we have from them, so we can understand where that particular emotion stems from. And most of the wheels agree. It helps. I really think the EUPD term, but acknowledge it's more widely used, it's just changing, isn't it? It's only because BP sounds, very similar to bipolar. That's the only reason they did it. I think we don't like it as well because there is an instability for a lot of us within it, and it's just not a very nice thought. I don't like any of the terms actually, most of the time. Don't think they're particularly nice. My partner and I, Karis put a link to it. Thank you, Karis, that's pretty kind of you. My partner and I have an emotional safe word, and it's been invaluable. It's allowed us to take care of each other even more. Exactly. When you use an emotional safe word, please also negotiate as to what you want when you use it. This is what people forget. If you use an emotional safe word, now what? So it's really important. Oh, you put that health emotions mapping up. So Jerry's put a link to what I'm talking about. It's where we feel things in our body, and I'm going to come to that in a minute as well.
So has Karis.
So is Paris. Get you lot, just shoving it in, you know me so well. Or not shoving it in, you know what I mean. So when you agree to have an emotional safe word, also please agree what you're going to do with it or what you need. So the safe word is a stop, but the agreement afterwards is what is it you want from me now? And that's really important. We need to do that. It's really important that we do that. So I would go there as well. God, 19 messages, I'm catching up. So Karis put one as well, thank you very much. I went for the fuck off you cunt option on the 5th occasion, funny enough. I don't blame you. There's a point where I'll give you a first chance, second chance maybe. Nah. I think they're leading. Yeah, let's cisgender everybody and say that this is the way they're supposed to react, you see? Women can't be angry. Yeah. One of those cliches. We had a big discussion about what the use of it would mean for each of us. Fantastic. So that's really good that you all know that. Andy, I don't think we've ever mentioned emotional safeguards in all the sessions we've done, Deb. It's very enlightening and a new thing to think about every day school day. Have I've definitely mentioned it at LAM and other places. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I have, maybe I haven't, but it's something I've used for a long time. So emotions and feelings, the use of those two words are quite interesting. So a lot of us label emotions and feelings as the same, but that isn't quite 100% true. So emotions psychologically are classed as, so they're often used as synonyms, but actually same meaning, but they're not quite. So an emotion is our physiological states that come through subconsciously. This is the general consensus nowadays. They are autonomous bodily responses to an external and or an internal event that we have. Feelings, however, are a subjective experience of those emotions and are often driven by our thoughts, reflections, and our experience. They create patterns, which is where I'm going to come on to Lisa Feldman in a minute. So let's just say that again. So emotions are our physiological states. We kind of start there. That's where we start, with an emotion. Generated subconsciously, can't always do much about it, can, but not aware that we can. Boom, they're up there. And they are autonomous. It's a bodily response to something that's internal or external. So if we do that, the feeling then is a subjective experience of those emotions, and they are often led by thoughts, reflections, and or experience and patterns. Lady Diana, suggestions for after safe word to aid life going forward versus being caught in feelings for the next 24 to 48 hours. You cannot be caught in feelings. You might think that you are, but you have a hell of a lot more control over them than you think you do. So the key here is to talk it through. If you don't listen to someone else's feelings and you don't hear what they're feeling and they don't feel heard, and they keep trying to reiterate it and you keep trying to tell them what they're feeling, you know, you tell someone what they're feeling, we're all very good at that, aren't we? And when you do that, that's really difficult. So I think we have to think about it. We have to think about what is it this person wants, and we need to see it through, and we need to understand that we've heard them. So sometimes just talking back can show that we've heard. I feel fucked off with you because you've done this, okay? So I can hear that you're really angry with me because of what I did. How can I help with that? What can I do to make this better? And what can I do moving forward? What do you need from me right now? Things like that. So it's actually seeing it through. There are arguments if you look at Gestalt type therapy as well. So Gestalt will argue that an emotion will last for around 20 minutes. That deep emotion is 20 minutes long. The problem is what we always do is we cut it short, we cut it short, we cut it short. We live busy lives. It's too much. It's too much to think about for everybody. So we're like, come on, fuck now, you're done. So shut up. Your mum only died yesterday. You're fine now. Like, come on. And all of us experience emotions in very different ways, depending on who we are. Jerry says, so Freud, emotions are unconscious, feelings are pre-conscious. Yeah. Or even semi-conscious, because they're patterns that are learned. Yeah. So for Diana's, I would really go with, it's really important for us to understand what the other person's trying to convey, not make assumptions, not tell them how it is, to really listen and to learn who they are. However, as Cinderella says, that's assuming they care. If they don't have that conversation with them. They're not worth it. Sometimes we look for closure. It's such an American word, closure, and actually it doesn't fucking exist. Closure is a comment that it's just crazy to try and get, because if I want closure, I want you to understand what it is I'm trying to tell you, and I want you to agree with me. I want you to see me and get it absolutely right. But actually, often closure comes after a very nasty situation or a breakup or a misunderstanding, and the other person doesn't really give a flying fuck. We need to work out closure with and for ourselves. We need to work it out and what that means. One thing a friend said to me recently is that you can't expect a wall to close. It was never open in the first place. Yeah, I would disagree with that. That's not a bad way to talk about it, really, is it? So when we were talking about, when I was talking about emotions versus different things, that we do talk about Ekman's 7. We do talk about happy, angry, sad, scared, content, disgust, surprise. And when someone's happy, often their cheeks are raised, their lips and corners of their mouths are pulled up, and this isn't for everybody all the time. And their eyes actually can sometimes get smaller or wider, but wider often means something more like a surprise. So there are different facial expressions that we have, and you can actually buy games, and you can even get them for free. There are apps that you can get that really help you recognize the basic core emotions. So there are loads of apps that you can get, and you can have a lot of fun with them trying to recognize the basic emotions that we have. We then have secondary emotions, which you could argue almost become feelings. And some people also argue, as I said, that we have 4. Cinderella said that's hard and needs the ability to control those emotions and feelings. Why does it lead to an inability? So help me with that one. I'd like to understand what you've just said. Why does it lead to an inability to control emotions and feelings? Because actually it's a purely personal, internal thing that we have to learn to do for ourselves, by ourselves, for the good of ourselves. Because it becomes a physiological response. So when it becomes a physiological response, what's interesting is we can unlearn the feelings that come from the emotion. So even with a hot flush, so a hot flush could be because we're angry, a hot flush could be because we're having a hot flush, like we're menopausal, or it could be an anxiety state, it could be many things. But what we tend to do, and I'm going to come on to this in a minute, is the pattern and the predictor we put in our head defines how it's going to be. So that's part of the problem. So we need to redefine our patterns and our predictors. So, for example, if your back goes, you go, fuck, shit, piss, bollocks, whatever, my back's gone. And then we're in that state of, oh, fuck, I can't breathe, I can't move, and we get very stiff and we adjust accordingly. And then like we're on our hands and knees to the loo, we can't manage, and that's the way it is. One arrow is shot at us, then your back's gone, fuck. Don't know what it means, it's the first time it's ever gone. When your back goes again, you get that first arrow, physiological, where it goes, fuck, my back's gone. But then we let go, and when we're like some kind of fucking amazing thing out of Lord of the Rings, when we go, the next arrow say, I won't be able to move, there's nothing I can do, I'm going to be on my hands and knees going to live, fuck me, I can't deal with this. Because your predictors and your patterns shoot those arrows, and that's where you respond. I'm using arrows as a metaphor, no, I know real arrows, clearly. So what we've got to learn to do is change our predictors and just wait a second, you see. It's really hard. It's really hard. However, we can do something about that. And that's what's really clever, that we can really do something about that. Because our emotions are pretty unconscious, the way they really impact us. Like think of when you're watching a horror film. I don't know if any of you like horror. I'm not the biggest fan of horror. I don't like things that make me jump particularly, but I really hate psychological thrillers. Like they scare the shit out of me because clearly that's my interest. The music, look, I'm utterly safe in my home. There is nothing going wrong in my home. I'm in the comfort of my home. It's warm, depending on your fuel bills. It's warm, you've got light on, you're watching a film. There is nothing for you to feel scared about at all. However, all of a sudden this thing comes on and your body responds in a really interesting way. And before you're even aware of it, you jumped or you screamed. If I take my second eldest daughter to a film and I can feel the whole, I think that's why I go to nicer cinemas now, a big sofa. If she's sitting near you, she can make the whole fucking row rock back. She jumps so hard. And that is a physiological, unconscious reaction. She's breathing heavier, you've got a faster heartbeat, all these things are happening and her pupils are dilating and boom, she's gone before she'd even had a chance to think about it. Whereas actually, if we take away some of the stimulants in that environment, like if you watch a horror film and you turn it down, you are less horrified. It's the music, it's all the setup that gets you going. It's all those really clever tones and things that they use and all those chords. So that happens before we're even conscious of what's happening. Your autonomous nervous system has already gone switch, 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 boom, off you go. Andy, love horror, love being made to jump. I feel it releases pent-up emotions. Well, we all know what to do to you next time we see you. And emotions do have some power over our thoughts because it's, like I was just saying about the arrow, it's like a first read of a situation. It's where we get into, and that's what we've got to be very careful. And listen, emotions are really fucking important, those core ones. They help us to take action, they help us to survive, they help us to avoid danger. They're very clever, they really look after us. And sometimes when we're in situations, when we are really, really in a situation where we're powerless, the emotions even don't do us any good. So that teaches us as well. That makes a difference. This is interesting. There was a horror film recently at Core Cinemas. Yes, I sent my daughter a link to that. It came out at the same time as the latest Halloween one, didn't it? But then there was this one, had a very strange character in it, and apparently people were fainting. So fuck knows what they did in it. But then somebody turned around and said, you're just saying that to get the viewing figures up. So I don't know if it was true or not. I would like to know. I can't remember what film it is, but yeah, it had a white face in it, very whited out. I can't remember what film it was, but yeah. That doesn't say the name, does it? Yeah, but I wonder if it was just like propaganda. I don't know. It's very interesting, but it kind of makes me want to watch it because I want to be the one who doesn't shit my pants or vomits or scream. But I think I'll probably watch it like this. I do that. When I watch a horror film, I just want to see a little bit of it so I can control how much I can see, and then I feel less scared. So we all have our ways of coping with them. Terrifier 2, thank you very much. You're going to be looking up. So when I was talking about that link earlier with that Jerry and Karis both gave you, that's a little bit of research. So we can talk about the emotions wheel, but the other option, if we don't do that, is body mapping. The most common reaction after being made to jump is laughter. So maybe there's an underlying thought in what these directors do, maybe just to bring a release. Actually, your body physiologically will laugh because what it's realised. What the emotion is fear, but then the thought and the feeling is one of ridicule, one of humiliation for some people, one of laughter for other people, and it all helps calm us down. Oh, thank God I was wrong. It brings up a completely different feeling for us, where some people feel really humiliated. Why the fuck did you let me watch that? I jumped. I really don't like it. So people feel very differently. I wouldn't argue that it's always to laugh. For some people, there's a deep humiliation and a shame when they are made or stimulated in a different way because of a different feeling. So that can happen as well. So if you can't understand the emotions, well, one thing we can start to do is look at body mapping. So there was, it's really interesting. So there's a statistics expert, and this research was done in Taiwan and Sweden, and it was really interesting research that's still being done on this as well. And what it does, in 2014, he looked at the 13 basic emotions that he said that there were, where they looked at on that map, if you have a look at it, where people are activated. So they feel a bit more busy, if you like. We feel a bit more active. So we feel different things in certain ways. So like if we're happy, we're pretty active all over. We're even more active in our chest, with some activity down our arms and in our hands. Our faces are active all the way around here, and it's very much in our chest. When we're angry, we're very active from the sort of like the bus line upwards. We have some activity ready to go in our muscles, in our thighs, because we can actually start to do something. We might want to run. It's very active in our jaws, and it's less active around the top, and it's even less active on the top of our skulls. We're pretty fucking active in our hands. They can be ready to clench or to do something, and we're active in our calf muscles, and we're active in our feet. So what's interesting is if you take the body map principle, it's overactivity or underactivity, like a real stillness or quietness that tells us where we're feeling things in our body. And sometimes when I'm working, especially with children, is where are you feeling? Where is fizzy? Where is telling you a message? What's happening for you? Where is, it's not really hot or cold, it's active. When my service animal scares me in the night, Belladonna says, I do laugh, but it doesn't take away from how terrifying was the sudden noises she made. Oh, I'm sorry. Does she make a lot? It's hard, isn't it? Sometimes when my dogs wake me up, I've got 3 dogs, and in the middle of the night, I'm like, fuck, shit, you can't. I get cross. I get more cross with the idea that I might just eat somewhere, actually. So we feel things really differently. So when we look at depression, and you look at this body mapping principle, depression is very active in the face, very active in the arms, inactive in our core, and very active in the legs. But the activity is a more cold activity, so it deadens, really deadens. So different feelings, different emotions respond in different ways, and it's really worth looking at those 2 links. It's honestly, I used to print this out and give it to people. There is a really good piece of writing about it on greatest.com. I think it is Greatest. If you look up greatest and emotional body maps, that's the one I like because it does a lot of talking around it. greatist.com. So do greatest.com. I like the writing around it. How do they test it? They think about it and they help people understand it. That's neat, like when you feel like you have a hole in you. Yes, so it's either inactive or active, but the inactive, so there's a neutral and it's below and above. Oh, thank you, Cinders. Really love you. You're very supportive and helpful. Oh, so Belladonna says she's really unsettled after the house move and enjoys jumping from the top of the wardrobe onto my tummy in the middle of the night. You know, that is quite, scared doesn't quite cut it sometimes. I would leash her to the bed. She's maybe a submissive.
Yes, yes, mistress.
Exactly. Just treat her as if she was submissive for now. Why not? No, I am kidding, clearly. Please don't think that. So, what's interesting for me is Lisa Feldman's research. And I love this piece of research. So, Lisa Feldman did a TED talk. So, again, you can look up a TED talk, you look up emotions, and you can look up Lisa Feldman. And it's really interesting what she says because Lisa Feldman Barrett, her full name is, I do call her goddess sometimes if the tables must turn. What she talks about, really interestingly, she's done a lot of research on this. She's researched emotions for 20 years plus. She really knows what she's talking about. She does it in the lab and she does it in different ways. Her hypothesis, what she actually says, and I really like this, is that your emotions or your feelings that come from them are guesses. They're guesses that your brain constructs in that moment when so many brain cells are working, trying to work out what's going on. And her point is if it's a yes, you have the capacity to do something about it. And that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But it goes back to that arrow system. What she does, which is interesting, is that, like when you hear something like this right now, what she shares is that our brains are really starting to work out what someone's saying. She shows a picture of some black and white blobs, and she says, have you really, really look at this, what do you think it is, what is this, what is it? What do I know? What do I know like that? What is it most like? What does it remind me of? And we're trying to recall everything to try and make sense of what we see. And when we see it, we're like, okay, and then we've got it or we haven't, but we'll have a go. And the problem there is what we have is something that she calls experiential blindness. And that's interesting because what she then does when she shows them the black and white blobs is she then puts the right colours in and all of a sudden you can see what it is. And everyone feels relieved because they can see the pattern for what it is. And that's her point. I won't tell you what she's showing in case you ever watch the TED Talk because I don't want to ruin it for you because most people can't really notice it. So you've now acquired some more knowledge and now you can see what it is. And emotions can be very like that. So the way we talk. So our predictions are pretty primal, they're pretty old, that's her point. They help us make sense of the world. Yes, so you're talking about pet cures now, aren't you? Nothing to do with this, guys. Belly plugins or any plugins, I use them as well. You can also buy a collar with the same stuff on for a puppy or a small dog or a large dog. Things we know. So your brain predicts and constructs your experience of the world using your past experience. What we tend to do is we go backwards and say, because this happened, and because I know this, it means that this will happen, therefore I know. And we get stuck in those predictors unless we have new information or new ways of getting patterns. So our brain is continuously predicting and trying to make sense of things. I think she talks about the Boston Marathon bombing. I think that's what she talks about. So I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that one. But she talks about one of their faces and how stone cold sober they are about it. They just don't show any emotion whatsoever. Because they've certainly believed it's right. So I find that really interesting. So your brain comes pre-wired to some feelings, is what she's saying, of course, from the physiology of your body. So you can make some feelings, calmness, agitation, if you watch what babies do, excitement, comfort, discomfort is her argument. But they're not emotions. Her argument is that the summary of what's going on is like a barometer in your body, and that we can change that when we learn to do that. So they're constructs. That's her argument. And I really like that, because if we can take the idea that emotions are constructs, we can change their core construct and start to make different things happen for us. So that's quite a nice thing. So it can have a very different meaning. So she takes a lot of that. So if you want to have a look at her, Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she's really interesting, really worth looking at. Lisa Feldman Barrett. Pheromones, we're still talking cats. When we are faced with emotions in somebody else, especially if they're negative, the Gottmans share that the sort of feelings and responses that we get are really detrimental. So what I want to talk about here is, how do we turn around and make better communication happen around emotions? That's kind of what I want to go to in the next hour. Whew, if you're still awake and still with me. Anyone bored yet? So the Gottmans talk about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but they talk about the 4 horsemen of relationships, about how negative. I go on a lot about the Gottmans, actually, because if you want to find out something about your emotions and you want to find out something about relationships and how to have them, read the Gottmans, Gottmans. It's Gottman.com. They are incredible human beings who work with loads of scientific research and back up everything that they're saying. So they talk about the 4 horsemen, and the 4 horsemen are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I'm still writing about emotions and science, but in relation to cats. Yeah, I guess you are, really, isn't it? If we've got the right smells, does it help us? And actually, that's not scientifically incorrect, is it? If we've got the right smells and the right things that we like, that can be quite nice. We feel good. Now we're getting sprays. We're doing well. Right, so we're going to talk a little bit about criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Everyone's so lovely. Everyone's helping everybody else. I like that. If we criticize somebody, criticizing a partner is very different to critiquing or voicing a complaint about what somebody's just about to say. Oh, thank you, Jazz. That's really kind of you. That's the talk. It's really interesting watching it. It lightened my mind. I was like, okay, that's so interesting. We can work on that differently. So when we talk about criticism, if somebody's trying to say, I don't like what you just did, it's very different to I don't like you, or you should, or you must, or you've got to, when we try and force that in. So if somebody's having an emotional response, if we make a complaint about them, that's not nice. If we make a complaint about their behaviour, that's different to criticising them. And that makes the difference as well. All right, I'm going to bring my dogs and my cats in a minute then. So a complaint is very different. The problem is when we are hurt by somebody else, of course we want to have a go at somebody. Thank you, John. So we want to say something. Doesn't mean that your relationship is going to fail, but it's not a good habit to get into. Because when we are really start to communicate like that, we actually become quite mean. We don't become very nice. We're not very kind. We start to mock. We want Goose. I have a little dog called Goose, and I have another little dog called Duck. We call him Duck Duck, because we say Duck Duck Goose wherever we go. It's very cool. So contempt is really hideous. Yeah, actually somebody did come in with a service dog once, so that is possible. They were allowed in. They had a very small service dog. So you never know. So let's go back to this. So we were just talking about criticism. We're also going to talk about contempt. If you're in a situation where somebody's being very emotional, it's very easy to attack. It's very easy. It's a step beyond criticism. It's horrible. Contempt is worse. I've had a tough time recently with signed off work. I haven't had a lot of support from my family. I feel like I'm stonewalling them, kind of fuck you. I'm not sure this is the right path to take. Let me come on to that in a minute. So when we have contempt, we start to go into sarcasm. We start to take the piss. We're like, really? Yeah, okay. What, you think you're tired? Fuck off. You've got no idea what my life is like. It's much harder for me. How many of us are guilty of that because we feel overwhelmed or we're having a go at somebody? And what it is, it's all about moral superiority. It's I'm the bigger person here. Fuck you. You've got no idea what it's like. I have it much worse than you. And that's pretty hideous, because I think what the Gottmans talk about is that there is research to prove as well that people who are contemptuous of each other are more likely to get infectious illnesses, colds, flu, and other things as well. So you're more open to a virus, the more contemptuous you are. I find that very interesting. It can't mean any good thing, can it? That's not so good. So why do we do that? Then we can also become defensive, especially if we're sorting this. So you know that thing of, hi honey, can you pick up some milk on the way home type principle? Or we're going to play tonight, we've made a promise. Cool, really looking forward to that. Did you get the milk? Or are we going to play tonight? Fucking hell, of course we're not going to play. I'm too fucking tired and I've had a really hard day. Why are you having a go at me? Emotional responsive, defensiveness, idiousness. Did you get the milk? Of course I fucking didn't. The traffic was really bad on the way home. It took me an extra half an hour. Why the fuck would I pick up milk? If people are using these 4 horsemen, the likelihood of them getting divorced just tripled. It is huge when we communicate like this around our emotions. Instead, what we can say is, I'm really sorry, I didn't do it. I'm going to pop out now and I'll go and sort that out. Or, yeah, do you know what? I absolutely promise you some play tonight. Let's play. Now, those things aren't appropriate if you are that exhausted and you can't do some of these things. As in 1718. Is it has M or just as? Or I don't want to get it wrong. I really hate getting people's names wrong. Those types of reactions are why I barely vocalise needs and wants or people please. Yeah, we have to be really careful, don't we? However, we have the right to be who we are, and it's really important. Andy, I'm torn between calling them out as to how they've made me feel. Nope, I'm going to come to that one in a minute. And just letting it go with you, so that's just how they are. I'm going to come to that one. Cinder says, this came up earlier in the week for a friend of mine. He was on the tube and overheard, so I'm coming home in 2 hours. 2 hours? So get off your ass and cook for me. I know who I'd be leaving. Definitely one of those conversations you don't want to overhear. Actually, definitely one of those conversations I don't want to hear or be in either. I can't do service topping if I'm not in the mood. I couldn't do it no matter how much I wanted to. Yeah. To be honest, letting it go seems to be working for me. Right. I'm going to come to this in a minute. Let's talk about stonewalling first of all. So stonewalling is often a reaction to contempt. These often come in an order. And then what we tend to do is we just withdraw. So rather than deal with what we've got to deal with, we withdraw because it feels easier to us. And it often takes a lot of the negativity of all the others to build up in order for us to withdraw. It's something where we go, but it then becomes a really bad habit. No, they don't come out of nowhere. The contempt, the way we communicate is built up. When we're annoyed with somebody, a lot of us don't know how to deal with our emotions. We don't know how to talk. So I'm going to cover that one in a minute and talk about the gentle way that we can sort these things out instead of being so critical or so contemptuous or so defensive or stonewalling. I really understand that somebody feels attacked and they want these conversations to stop at times. So it's really important that we do that. I can't deal with this right now. This is too much for me. Please can we look at this tomorrow? Because we feel physiologically flooded with everything that's going on. And they don't come out of nowhere. It takes time for stuff to build up. The average couple who are in trouble, the average molecule who are in trouble, the average people who are in trouble in relationships, takes 2 years for them to leave. What the Gottmans did was a really interesting piece of research around this. So what they did is they took couples and they said, we want you to save an argument and we want to have an argument in our studio where we're recording. And they got all these couples and these couples were full-blown argument. They let them go for at least 20 minutes. At the end of 20 minutes, they went into the argument and said, we're so sorry, hold your argument, hold your horses. Can you just sit at opposite ends of the room just for a second? Take these books. Okay, right. What I'm going to ask you to do is our equipment has broken. We can't record at the moment. So what we want you to do is just have a read for 20 minutes. And I'll tell you as soon as our equipment's back. Hopefully it won't be longer than 20 minutes. What they found was that each and every single person who had to sit and calm for 20 minutes, when they had the argument still going, it wasn't going in the same way. Often a timeout can be a really good idea rather than continuously going at each other. But it also means that we haven't been able to get these things out. We haven't sorted it out. So we have to look at managing better. And there are antidotes to the 4 horsemen as well. Mike and I have different needs for dealing our emotions and depression. We eventually started asking, do you need space, comfort, or solutions? I would always advocate that. When we're listening to somebody, what is it you want from me? Do you want me to provide a solution? Do you want me to listen? Do you want me just to hold you? What is it you want before we start talking? That is a really good way to help somebody else deal with what they need. And it's a really simple solution. Most couples therapists will recommend that every single time. There is always an antidote. So if you are feeling very critical, we need to start using the word I feel. I'm into those timeouts when you think the water's going to start boiling. The only thing I would say about a timeout, if you are about to take a timeout from somebody, what we need to say is, I need half an hour or 40 minutes. You need to negotiate the time where you are going to talk about it. Because if you just say, I can't do this, and you walk away, you're stonewalling. Now, stonewalling is really necessary, grey walling, if you have a very narcissistic type person, you have somebody who won't listen, you have somebody who is not very kind. So we have to be really careful. With someone essentially ghosting someone for a few days in the midst of an argument, then them justifying it as a timeout, which had been agreed, hadn't been agreed, is a cunt move, it's a cunt move. It's a completely cunt move, because if someone disappears for 2 days, they're just thinking about them, they're not thinking about the other person. As I just said, the really important bit in this is to negotiate the time to come back. And that's really important. That is not okay by me. Need to come back from the timeout. Timeouts need to be discussed before they're needed. Exactly, Sean. Or is it Sean or Sean? Just want to make sure I get that right as well. So we need to agree the time we're going to come back, or arrange the time we're going to talk about it, whether it's tonight or tomorrow, but it needs to be preferably within the day. If it can't be done because it's late, it needs to be probably within the next day. But of course, that also depends on people's work schedules and everything else as well. So when we're critical, when we're being really horrible and we're attacking someone's personality or their character, instead of saying, when you did this, I feel this and I want that, rather than you shouldn't have done that, you're a fucking cunt, you need to stop that. So when you I feel, I want. So when you're separating the behaviour from the person in that moment to help us deal with emotions. So I feel, I want, positivity a lot easier. I don't want to feel this way. What can we do about this? How can we work with it? When you are being contemptuous, what the Gottmans found is, sure sucks when someone says there will be follow-up and there's not. Do you know what? They're the line is, if there isn't follow-up, I'll give them a second chance. If they can't do it again, I'm out. They can't deal with relationships. They can't have a conversation. They can't have a discussion. Not necessarily an argument, but a discussion. However, if your arguments are vitriolic, acidic, contemptuous, defensive, critical, then actually I understand why people also want to walk away. Some of us don't listen. We have to learn how to listen. When somebody is contemptuous, what the Gottmans found is that we have to build up a culture of appreciation and respect and value. And they talk about the 5-1 rule. And the 5-1 rule is to notice that your partner does and your partners do really lovely things. You need at least 5, really, to help yourself to be able to criticize one thing. We have a go all the time at people. It's like the old-fashioned shit sandwich. Remember, you used to say that at work, give someone a positive critique or something really lovely, appreciate what they've done, give them a critique that says this needs to change, and I also value because you do this. It's really hard to do when you're losing your temper. So when you're losing your temper, remember what we just said about taking a 20-minute time out and taking responsibility for something that you've done really makes a big difference. And then we have to learn how to physiologically self-soothe. What will help you in that moment if you need to do something instead of stonewalling? How can you help yourself? I think it's really important to listen to somebody and say, you've got a really valid point, I'm really sorry, how do we move forward? But that's really hard when your emotions are really having a go and you're really, really struggling. Active listening is difficult, it doesn't always come naturally, but it's a good skill to know. And do you know what, Mama Foxy, that's the point, it is a skill. So skills need to be developed, they need to be practiced, they need to be actively done, rather than thinking that we can just do them. So what I find is, for example, let's say I meet somebody who has an addiction to something. Let's say alcohol in this circumstance. So somebody comes to me and says, I've got an alcohol addiction, can you help me? Let's say I can help them and they stop drinking. And they go, brilliant, I'm done. No, now the work's going to happen. Now we do the work. Now we have to look at all the reasons underneath and what's happened and what that means. And then we really start listening to what the problem is. Before we were just fixing it for a while. Now we need to listen to what the problem is. That makes a real difference. And while someone's drinking, they won't be able to handle their emotions anyway. Their emotions won't come up in the right way if we are an addict. One strategy someone used with me is to tell me to manage my feelings surrounding feelings inadequacy was to assume the kindest explanation when multiple explanations exist. Issue is, it was never ever the kindest explanation which made my feelings worse. So I was then shamed for my feelings instead. Was this a fault of mine and feeling anxious as the kindest explanation never existed? I think that's a complex answer, Bella, for a start. I don't think it's necessarily strategy for me when I say assume the kindest explanation. That's not a place I would go to. I would ask you what other explanations could there be, even if you're not used to them. What explanations would you give to somebody else or somebody you care for? What possibilities are there rather than either or? What's the second, the third, the fourth option? Could any of them fit? Are you used to any of them? Because one thing that also happens to human beings is when we try and give them the best explanation, I was working with someone earlier, and to try and say to them, oh, fucking hell, you don't even deserve to be happy, do you? That was so obvious in what this human was saying. That was more shocking to them than anything. So they go out to sabotage positivity. So we have to understand what's happening in somebody's mind before we give them a strategy all the time. I'm giving you many strategies in many ways. If it's super polarizing, it's an either or. I want you to bring in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are multiple possibilities. Which one fits you? Which one suits you? Which one do you want to discard? And then that's always worth looking at in therapy or through your own personal growth to say, why is it I throw that one away? Why is it I want that one? Is this good for me as a human being? Overall, what does this mean? And I've said it before, and I've shown you before, one of the things I do is keep a picture of myself as a child on my phone, and I very much wonder if it hurts her and what she's got to say about it, and the influence of her and her emotions and how she feels. That makes a difference. So we have to learn how to self-soothe, and that's really hard. How do we self-soothe? Andy, you said earlier that you maybe don't want to bring it up with them because they made you feel. I'm going to say something really contentious here. Nobody can make you feel. You feel in response to what you're getting or not getting. So when we can own that as well, we can also start to feel better. That's really facetious. I've just said something that takes months into a split second. So it isn't about how they make you feel. Their actions bring out something that's already inside you, and you want something else. So sometimes it's really worth looking at what is it I want from this? What is it I want from them? And then when we understand that, what we can then answer is, can they even give it to me? Are they emotionally capable or aware of actually giving it to me? When people come into therapy or they're cross with other people and they're very emotional, they have an unmet need. They want something from somebody. It doesn't mean the other person is capable of giving it. Our parents, our friends, our families, somebody mentioned earlier that you need to go back to the 50s and 60s of parenting, the way they are. We have to want to change. And if you ask for change from somebody and they don't want to change, it's not going to happen. So the only power we have is for us to change in response. We have to look at what is it I want? Why do I react in that way to them? What else can I do to make myself feel better? And often it's, I want something from those people, and that's really hard. I really believe this on make or want to feel. It's liberating. I agree. Thank you for saying that. Yes, being honest, I just wanted comfort, and I'm too scared to ask. However, what sort of comfort? What sort of comfort is it that you want, Andy, from them in order to feel better? To tell you that you're right, to tell you that it'll be okay. You want to cuddle, you want something else. And then we have to work out, what if they can't give it to me? What is it I want? It's really interesting. It took me years to realise my dad could never give me what I wanted or needed to be given. Once I realised it was so liberating. It is Karis, isn't it? It really is. Cinders, I agree with Debs on this one. Thank you. It's something I've learned personally when I had to reset boundaries with people in recent years. Same thing with triggers too. It takes time to master the art of changing ourselves rather than avoiding things. It really does. That sounds similar to anxious attachment I have in relationships. And do you know what? Whether we have a secure or an anxious attachment or an insecure attachment, the figures are 50-50. Roughly 50% of people have secure attachments, roughly 50% don't, of all those criteria that comes into them. And that's quite a lot about emotion, isn't it? Makes a difference. Mama Foxy says it's why I spend time building self-soothe boxes or packages or care sheets, anything that makes me feel good that I can come to when I learn how to self-soothe. And that's all about emotions. Makes a difference. And just for them to tell me they care and that I'm loved. And what if they don't, Andy? If they don't and they can't give it to you, what else can you get? Makes a difference. Really does. Sean, your dog is being loved by people. And look, I've got a writing on attachment, or you could look for, no, you wouldn't, Bella. You wouldn't die for the dog. No, you would not. You see, that's over emotional. I'm picking, I know how it's a little bit different. Right, so I'm working on that in therapy, needing and wanting reassurance. Yes, so it also comes to how can we self-soothe? You know, I think one thing that I think that's really important that COVID taught us is we can't always rely on somebody else in order to manage. And when we can't, that's really difficult. So I think one of the things we have to learn to is how to love ourselves, how to work with that. So let's talk about a couple of things that we can talk about and how it works. Because awful things happen to people all the time in life and in situations.
Sorry, Deb, can you just shush for 10 minutes while we look at Sean's dog?
No. I'm going to bring my dogs in a minute, I'm telling you now. Right, so.
Unless they lick your face. And, oh.
They do lick my face when I let them, but I'm not putting them up here. Release the hounds. They would jump in, you do have a hound, it's crazy. So I talk to Poppy about this a lot, scene counsellor, an awful lot. We talk about DBT, we talk about dialectical behavioural therapy, we talk about distress tolerance, and we talk about what can we do, because actually the world isn't against you. So when we have very strong feelings, what we often feel like is the world is against us, that everything against us and things aren't very good for us. But actually, that's not true. The truth is the world doesn't give a flying fuck. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't give a shit whether you're good or bad. There is no way around that. We have to care whether we're okay. So one thing that we talk about in dialectical behaviour therapy is radical acceptance. And that's quite hard. When you have a problem, Marsha Lyman, who does DBT, dialectical behaviour therapy, not dog beauty therapy, although that's probably a good idea, dog behavioural therapy, she talks about that there are 4 possible solutions for us to look at when we're in a situation. We can solve it, we can change how we feel in that moment, we can accept it, or we can stay miserable. Those are our 4 options in that moment. And what we need to use there are reality acceptance skills, because that's what they are. So we have a choice. We solve it, we change how we feel, we accept it, or we stay miserable. That's quite difficult, isn't it? Some things we cannot solve, some things we cannot change. We can always change the way we feel. And pain is unbelievable for some people with some experiences that they have in some way, shape, or form. So X has happened, it's not very nice, it's not very good for us. And that's where radical acceptance comes in as an option. Totally. Reality is as it is. The facts are the facts, that is how it is. There are limitations. Why should we accept reality? Well, if you try and fight it, it doesn't change something anyway, does it either sometimes? In fact, sometimes by accepting something, we can actually learn to get on with it better and find different solutions. If we're fighting it all the time, it doesn't help us. If we reject reality, our pain turns into suffering, and that's very different. Pain to suffering is a very different thing. Yes, Sean, DBT seriously helped me understand the trauma glasses I view the world through. Oh, I'm glad that helps. They are my filters that take the raw and morph it into my insecurities. Yeah. So we interpret what we see, Sean, in order to fix us. And that's part of the problems with the pattern of our emotions and the pattern of our upbringing and everything else that we've experienced. See, told you. And it's also called confirmation bias, those goggles, those glasses that we use. Told you, I knew it wouldn't work, it wasn't going to happen. Now, if you go into an interview and you go in, I'm not going to get it, fucking point, you're very unlikely to get the job. Hi, what do you think about our company? It's all right, don't know, read a bit. Whereas if you go in and say, oh my God, I really like your ethos and your morals, I've been reading about this about you, and I saw that recently you've done this. Oh, engagement, we like that, it's different. Belladonna is currently working through a DBT workbook whilst I wait for the NHS to get back to me. It helps a bit, but I know I have a long way to go. There are really brilliant workbooks for DBT. There's the one with the spiral with all the skills that you can get. There's the one over there. There are also little things that you can use. God, I haven't done these in ages. Where are they? Where are they? You also get the DBT cards. I don't know what I've done with mine. The DBT cards.
Yeah, but it's
cards. The highly recommended. There is a DBT neurodivergent workbook as well. So you don't just have to have one that's There you go. We're all saying the same thing right now. So you can get your basic one, or you can get the neurodivergent DBT workbook as well. And again, if you're neurodivergent, absolutely go for that. And Cindy just put up the cards. Thank you very much. How does one go about getting therapy? So it depends what country you're in, and it depends whether you want to go privately or whether you're covered. After that, it depends what sort of therapy you want. For me, it's not about the therapy, it's about the therapist. For me, it's not about their approach, it's about their connection. For me, I want to be challenged. I don't want to just have somebody say this is the way it's going to be or nod all the time. For me, challenge creates growth. So it just depends what you want. When you go and see a therapist, do not ask them how many years they've been working, because they can work with years and just seeing 2 clients a week. Ask them how many hours they've got. When you go and see a therapist, go and speak to them about what approaches they've taken, why, what's worked, what hasn't. I ask them how much therapy have they had. That's what I really like. How much therapy have you been through? What's your journey been like? What have you done? And that's one of my important questions I ask a therapist, rather than this whole thing of how qualified are you? It doesn't matter how qualified you are if you haven't done the journey and somebody you can't connect with another human being's feelings. That makes a real difference. It's really hard to radically accept something that's going on. If we don't have the skills, we don't know how to accept painful events. And there are lots of things you can read around radical acceptance that will make you feel a lot better. The problem is our emotions get in the way. And actually, Bella, I noticed you shared something the other day, which was about the jar and the size. You were talking about grief and emotions. So when you look at some of the theories around grief, what's really important as well is to understand, even with emotions, is that they feel like they're all encompassing, that they're this huge size. Actually, what we really need to work out is that life grows around things, and we can learn to manage them. They're not as big as we think they are, because life creates buffers, so we learn to deal with them. And that's where the emotional wave comes in as well. So the emotional wave is a theory that an emotion builds and builds and builds and builds, and it gets really unbearable. We can't deal with it. And just at that point, and I've spoken about this before, the point before it just tips over the edge is like transition in birth, in human birth. We spend 20 minutes, half an hour, 20 minutes in something called transition. And that's that point where we start to shake, we start to tremble, lots of chemical things start to happen, our teeth may start to chatter. We feel like we can't do it. There might be things of panic of give me drugs now. Actually, it might be too late. Or it might be, I don't want to do this. Put your hand inside me, just hold that child in. I'm not giving birth. There might be lots of things. There's a transition period which is really complex. However, when that baby starts to come out, I'm talking about very common births, normal. I'm not talking about difficult or different aspects of birth. And I really understand a lot of people have a lot of problems with birth. I'm just talking about the most average birth. So that point there, baby starts to come out, we're pushing, baby comes out, we're okay. We give birth to emotions. We reach transition, we go to the top, we go, I can't do it, I can't do that. And actually there is no baby, so what we can do is just say, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm going to develop something else instead. I'm going to have this as a coping mechanism. I don't recognize that works that way. I'm going to develop this for myself instead. I'm going to have this. And they're not conscious choices. However, if we learn to ride that transition and it drops off by itself, we've learned a distress tolerance, a capacity to be able to do it. And you've got to remember, sometimes when we can't manage these things, how long can we manage them for? What does that mean? I would really recommend that you read anything by Marsha Lynham. I think the woman is a genius, incredible. And pain is pain. It doesn't have to turn into suffering and agony. And that's one of the points of radical acceptance. We accept the reality for what it is. This is what's happening. The event or situation had a cause in some kind of way in the first place. Something happened. And that actually, can we manage this even with pain alongside? Even things that are out of our control. Cindy says, ask them awkward questions and call them out if needed. I do it all the time, much to the annoyance of the CBT therapist. I wish not to be. Most CBT therapists won't like that at all. I personally want a relational therapist who uses some CBT, who uses DBT, who uses, I like plurality in my therapy. Because I'm very pluralistic. I've had lots of training in different areas. I also would say, which person did you recommend just then? Marsha Lynham. So Marsha Lynham is the founder of dialectical behavioural therapy. Even her own life book is so interesting to read because she came through a hell of a lot, and she's really interesting in the ways that she works. There are lots of distress tolerance skills that you can, self-soothing techniques that you can use as well. There's the 5-4-3-2-1 method, which people have heard of. Have all of you heard of that? 5-4-3-2-1. Name 5 things you can see, and just so I add to it a little bit. So I say name 5 things you can see and describe them. So I look at this cup. It's grey. It's got a bottom that comes in slightly. It's got a rim at the top that's very smooth. The hand is quite long, quite wide, and it's shiny. So I go a little bit more into it rather than I can see a cup. Name 4 things that you can hear. Name 4 things that you can touch. Sorry. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch. What does the cup feel like? But don't go into an emotional response. We're trying to calm our emotions here. Name 3 things that you can hear. Really listen out for them. I can hear a dog bark, for example. I heard a click. Whether that was Jerry or not, I don't know. The only person I can hear is a potentially small click. And I can still hear my dog bark.
Really small click. I've got the biggest click in the world.
Absolutely. I'll come into a few of them as well, including tip and stop and all of them. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So 3 things. So we've got smell and touch. We've got all these different things. So in fact, if you look up my writing on FetLife, which is fuck for having a panic attack, it gives you a lot of those. And it gives you a lot of those to actually work from so that you can use. Weighing the pros and cons sounds silly as a technique. And yes, of course, you have a huge clip. But promise. I use 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I use tip. Jerry, I would want a therapist that has read, studied a lot, but is not wedded to any specific therapy. Pluralistic. In my own mental health work, it was always what makes sense to me right now, rather than this, what can I call boring to this? Just Jerry's dodgy me, I think. Judith, if you're really distressed, are you actually going to remember this? No. So what you've got to do is teach yourself to do it. This is one of my favourite things at this moment in time. If I pick up my phone, I'm going to practice one of the techniques. The more you do them, the better you get at them. But if you only want to recall them when you're having a shit time, that's like going to therapy when you are firefighting. If you are just firefighting all the time, nothing will work for you. You have to learn to do these things when you are calm, when you're okay. So one of the things Marsha Lyon talks about as well, alongside radical acceptance, is often in a crisis we make emotional rather than rational decisions. So she talks about the wise mind. The widening of a path is kind of my expression, whereby we can accept emotions, but we can also accept thinking and logic and try and make the two work together. So we have to look at, rather than being rash and impulsive, can we look at other options? Like I just said to you, Bella, look at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Don't just go from 1 to 10. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for us. It's too extreme. Having a look, trying to find that middle path, that wise mind, is really important. And as I say, radical acceptance is really good. Listen, distraction is still really effective. When I meet someone with trauma, I often teach them the television technique. I often teach them quite a few techniques whereby they're actively disassociating. So sometimes when things aren't very good, we want someone to disassociate because that's what helps them cope in a moment. But the trend is, oh no, we mustn't disassociate, let's get you back in the moment. Why the fuck would you want to do that if you're on a tune? That's really impactful. Or if you're on a bus, that's ridiculous. Help someone work through it in their own way. When you're feeling fine, it's tempting to deny the shit, but looking at shit from an okay position can really help make sense of the shit. I agree. She also talks about the IMPROVE skill. So the IMPROVE is a acronym. So the I stands for imagery, the M stands for meaning, prayer, relaxation. She found a lot of religion. One thing in the moment, vacation and encouragement. So she, again, look all these things up. I don't have time to go through them all massively, so that can really help. So what she talks about, well, okay, prayer doesn't have to be religious. Prayer can be a mantra. Prayer can be about us. Prayer can be about spirituality. Prayer can be about many things. It doesn't have to be religious. That's why she talks about prayer. So they're tiny little things that people can use, and it's really important. So what's the meaning from this? What's the imagery from it? What am I getting from this? What does it mean? Improve it. What's playing in my mind here? What's happening to me? How can I relax? One of the best ways to relax is progressive muscle relaxation, which means really tightening up your body and really letting go. The oxygen that's creating the difference it has, it just helps us slow down. One thing in the moment that she talks about is just slowing down again all the time. And if you want to bring in vagal nerve theories and really help deal with your emotions, changing your temperature can really help. One of the best things we can do if we are in quite a strong position, fucking hell, don't just go and do this to anybody and don't do it to each other, but freezing cold water as a form of contact will really help. So plunge your face in freezing cold water when you feel overwhelmed by an emotion. Clearly, if you have rosacea or something else in your skin and you want to look after it, this isn't the best technique for you. But freezing cold water, mammalian diving reflex. So it's that capacity, isn't it, for us to cold all around the back of the neck. It can really help. Taking a break, going away can really help. She talks about resetting the system. That's another thing you can look at. And then what Bella was talking about was the TIP method, TIPP. So TIP, again, is an acronym, but which I was just talking about, which is temperature, intense exercise that we can use, pace breathing, and paired muscle relaxation. So I'm putting what Bella's just said in with all of these things that we can use. So TIP responses help us work with the limbic system, and they calm emotional arousal, and they also help us work with the vagal nerve as well. And you can do them anywhere quite easily, and they're quite easy to do. Change your temperature. I run the shower cold after having a warm shower. Great for blood flow, would highly recommend. It's also great for dopamine. And if you have ADHD, you are often searching for dopamine. So what I also recommend, if my ADHD clients can bear it, is for them to go and have a really cold shower after every time they have a shower, because they get a dopamine hit. Because sometimes with ADHD, what we tend to do is look for some kind of hit, whether it's emotional or not, in some way, shape, or form of dopamine. Are you shook it, Bella? I'm sorry you're shook it, but yes, that's why it works so well for you, or it's part of the reason. So if you're, I'd be shook it. If you are neurodivergent and your neurodivergency is ADHD, a temperature change will work really well for you, because dopamine is what you're looking for 9 times out of 10 in some way, shape, or form. And if you do a really quick temperature change, especially with freezing cold water, actually it will help you. However, to build up your dopamine on a regular basis, Bella, what I would also say is have a cold shower every day as well, or put your face in really cold water really regularly. It really helps. So intense exercise. So what I mean by intense exercise isn't you go to a class every day, is it do 20 jumping jacks. Do something on the spot really immediately that makes you go, and it fits over. Oh, that's a really good shout. Hopefully your husband doesn't mind. What really cold showers, because you'll scream or the 20 jumping jacks. Just a really quick something that gets us going. Do something slower, like, you could do some walkers on the floor or anything. Do anything that just gets everything pacing and going. Paired muscle relaxation, just go with muscle relaxation. Really, really tense, really, really light, and that's really good. Gags are good for muffling. I fucking hate gags. Sorry, I'm not a gag fan of it. Hey, listen, I've just spoken through an hour and 42 minutes. Gags are never going to suit me, are they? And of course, pace breathing. Now, pace breathing can be different for different people. Some people talk about taking a deep breath in. Some people talk about holding breath. Some people talk about letting go of the breath. Some people say take a deep breath in and then breathe out. I personally really like a nice calm deep breath of around 4, and I like a really big deep breath out of around 7, or imagine I'm blowing through a whistle. That's the one that works for me. I'm the one that works for you. I want you to do an entire 2-hour workshop, guys. I probably just swing my tits and it'd be really boring after 5 minutes. I'll remind you that next time the Airbnb doesn't have that. You were saying you want me to wear a gown, strange people. So there are different things that we can look at that really helps us when it comes to breathing and other things as well. What do we mean when we're talking about trying to sort these crises out for us? Again, I would really have a look at crisis survivor skills under DBT, something I would really look up, and it's worth doing. When you're trying to express an emotion, it's really hard. Now, one of the things you said earlier, Angie, is you make me feel strange, says the whisk queen. The whisk wasn't consensual. It wasn't my choice. Someone shoved it inside me and ripped my fucking coil out. That wasn't a choice. I didn't know they were going to use a fucking balloon whisk. How did I know? I had a pillowcase over my head. It's a whole other story. Right, so when we say that people make me feel, we disempower ourselves. Why is it so good? You make me feel is an accusation. It puts the person into a corner. When someone's in a corner, they become defensive, or they attack. You don't give them a third option. So when we say I feel and we own our own feeling, we're not accusing anymore. We're not having a go at somebody, and that makes a real difference. Would you prefer listening to somebody saying, gosh, I feel really uncomfortable, or you've made me feel really uncomfortable? Would you prefer to say, I'm really struggling with this, I'm finding this really hard, or you've made me feel like an utter cunt, why have you done that? They're very different the way that they're heard, and I think it's really important. It's really disempowering. And I'm talking about empowering you. So you make me feel, make somebody say, I fucking didn't. That's not what happened. You made me feel this. Oh, yeah, but you're not. What the fuck are you talking about? You do that. You're not a nice person. It's because of this. And we invite an argument, and we invite the person to step onto the drama triangle because we're persecuting them. So we feel like a victim, or they feel like a victim, and then we swap between the two, or we try and rescue. So owning our feelings, as Jerry says, is really important. I feel, I am, I really struggle with this, and that's really important. And also, it's a real misunderstanding when you say you make me feel, because I like taking your situation, Andy. Your family don't make me feel shit if they don't talk to me, because it's got nothing to do with me. The thing that's relevant, really relevant here, is your involvement with them. That's the thing that makes us feel. That's the thing that makes the difference in that moment. So that's what we have to think about. So if you tell a joke, for example, and you want to make me laugh, sometimes I make really laugh if I find it funny. Other times I might just look at you and think, you cunt. Let's say it's a racist joke. Let's say it's a misogynistic or misandrist, or let's say it's something else. I won't like those jokes. I'm not good at them. I hate them. I feel really uncomfortable when people say things like that and I call them out on it and they think they're funny. I don't. And I'm not being politically correct. I'm working with my own discomfort in that moment. Or it might be that somebody says, oh my God, watch this video, it's so funny. And you watch someone have the most, there's £200 videos where somebody has a crash and they're fine. But I just go, oh my God, I feel so uncomfortable. I hate those. So it's interesting. How do we make people do something? It's about our response as much as about the person trying to do something. And sometimes it's really good to remember that a joke won't always make you laugh, which means a negative thing won't always make you feel. So it's about owning your own power there as well. What we're talking about here is building resilience. And resilience is really hard when we have feelings. One thing we can do is change the narrative. So let's go into a little bit of CBT instead of DBT. Changing the story. When we start repeating things and saying them in our heads, we end up in a rumination, like when we're cycling thoughts and we're saying things that are really bad, and we're just spinning that story like a hamster wheel again and again and again and again. Maybe we need to write the story differently. Maybe we need to state it differently. If we do expressive writing, if we write in a journal, if we do something. Cinders, I was absolutely livid this afternoon after receiving some really shitty news, but my reaction is what I could control. I often use anger to my advantage by drawing on it. I think anger is beautiful. I think it is brilliant. I think it is effective and empowering and incredible. I think aggression is very unsexy. I think violence is very unsexy unless I've asked to have my head kicked in because I'm a pervert. That's the one with consent, right? Completely different. But, if I'm angry, it's empowering. When I visualize anger, I see an old-fashioned coal type steam train, when they go shh, shh, and they're shoving that power in. Anger is incredible if we embrace it. It facilitates energy in so many ways. It just means we shouldn't run over someone with it. When I'm not crying for my anger often pushes me to do the dishes. It's a weird one. Weird is a really interesting word. For example, I had a psychodynamic psychoanalytic and a psychodynamic supervisor once for years, and they talk about the meaning of words. They talk about how we use them and why. And weird is really interesting because weird means the way of the world in which I have no control. And often when people use the word weird, it's because they feel powerless or they don't really know or they're confused by something. So it's really good to sometimes understand words. They don't carry it there as well. Hello, Sean's dog. Everyone's saying hello to your dog still. All right. It's the only way that they get done, so I guess it's lucky the motor breed's giving you grey hairs. Grey hairs are beauty and knowledge. Pretty awesome grey hairs, not bad things. So when we change the narrative, it really helps. There was a really interesting study in the 80s where people were so much happier and healthier when they did this expressive writing. Also saving money in bleach. I just chopped all the ends of my hair off, and because I've got so much bleach on it after chemo, it's such a fucking mess, I hate it. So I've chopped it short to see if it will grow, and if not, I feel like I'm gonna fucking go back to being bald or something, and I can't be doing it anymore. So we need to find different stories. Okay, my hair's a perfect example of that. If I can't be what it wants to be, where can I get to? If not, I'm going back to something I feel okay with. Change the story. It doesn't have to be negative that my hair hasn't grown back okay after chemo. I can change the story. I can re-empower myself and make it different. So finding silver linings, turning different things. Facing your fears is really important when it comes to dealing with your emotions. What a lot of us do is walk away from it because we can't believe that we can sort it. If you've seen the film Inside Out, when you remember that joy and sadness have to stand at the top of the stairs and they have to go down the stairs and they have to confront their biggest fear, which is the big giant clown and different things that are in there. If we often have very old patterns around fear that are based on us being really little and childlike. However, what we forget is that we've grown up and that our fears are actually not as big. So that's really important to remember. It'd be nice to have hair, to actually have grey hairs. I console myself with all the money I saved on shampoo. So I might be doing that soon, who knows. So overcoming a fear as a practice is really important for us to get into. Slowly, exposure, let's go to a different therapy now, let's go to exposure type therapy. Slow exposure, gentleness, small things that help us get used to stuff that we're really frightened of. And it really works. Exposure therapy is impactful, effective, and it's really good. Also, the other thing I think we need to have to practice often is good old compassion. I'm a really big believer in compassion. That's why I have that photo of myself when I'm younger. If we're not kind to ourselves and we're not kind to children, that's difficult. We can feel really lonely and awful, and we can feel wrong as though we're to blame. Find some compassion. It's really important. If you wouldn't say it to somebody else, if you wouldn't do something. So be mindful of yourself. Remember, you're not alone in the situation that you're in. I have thousands of clients that I've seen over the years. I've got 50, 60,000 plus hours of practice. No one's alone in most of what they're feeling. Yes, it works very well. Exposure therapy is another technique I've used on my rescue cats for great success. Yes, exactly. Dogs are really good at this. The more we expose, the more they realise that we're in charge and in control, and with cats as well. Often when they're reactive, especially with dogs, we need to take control and we need to be calm so dogs and cats actually react, and that's exposure therapy in and of itself. How would you treat a friend? How would you treat somebody else? Write yourself a nice letter, think about these things. So those things really matter as well. I think as well what we have to be aware of, having the realisation that if you like the moment right now or make up with your life in this moment, then it's helpful to realise it took every single positive and negative thing that has come before that was necessary to fall into this exact moment right now. That's a very beautiful thought as well. I really like that. And I think when somebody sees a flood coming in, what they don't realise is the flood started with a very tiny drip of water. And it's the same for positivity. So sometimes when my clients feel good, it's like when they feel sad, it's very easy to say, why are you sad? What's happened? Whatever, any of those sort of comments. But how often do we say it to somebody about happiness? How did you get here? Well, I don't know, it just happened. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't wash with me as a therapist. It didn't just happen. What did you do? What were you actively involved in to make this moment? Let's look for that tiny drip of water for you to realise that this is where you are and that you've created this, and how do you do that? And that's really important because that authenticity is really important as well. But I think we're living in an age of oversharing, of toxicity, of sharing and hoping that the world will fix us and make it better without realising that that power is within us and that's all we can do. So we tend to overshare. Some people as well, so I've got a writing on that that's very important to me because we do tend to kind of trauma dump on others. Bella, funny enough, Pumpkin's having to get over her fear of dogs as my housemate is blind with a guide dog. Still in the puppy first stage, but it's getting easier. Exactly. You know, when you first get a kitten, they'll often go and hide behind the washing machine or they get stuck somewhere. They'll come out. but only if you give them time. But if you try and grab them all the time from behind the washing machine, you're making them more scared and you're making them pull in. Sometimes it's really important for ourselves with compassion is just to pull away and say, there's food here, you can come out. My happy always comes from external validation. It didn't start that way, Cinderella. It didn't. So although external validation can help us and it's nice, you listen to it. So somewhere internally you reflect that at the moment you're looking for that to create the reflection. It is within you, it's just finding out what it is. That can make a real difference to us as human beings. Makes a real difference. We're human, we make mistakes. We've really got to be kind to ourselves. Some people are very, very emotional. Some people feel emotions really intensely. You can argue that some of those, when we look at people, it might be that there's some kind of mental illness in some way, shape or form. It could be that we're just very intense. It could be that we're hypersensitive. It could be lots of things. People with ADHD can also have a lot of intense emotions, as can people with borderline, bipolar, lots of different things that we could go into. There are hundreds. However, we can also look at people who are emotionally really responsive as well. And what's interesting is how people put a negative slant on that all the time. What I really like is actually, how do we look at that in a positive way? How do we start to change our thinking around that? And there, Dabrowski looked at overexcitability and over emotions. And what he did is put a very different slant on it, because he talked about those people being gifted, empaths, people being aware, psychometers, imaginative. He used all these amazing words because he said that they were compassionate and had amazing interpersonal skills. So I think that's really important to put a different slant on something. Not very many people think like that. No, but we can, and we can about ourselves. And instead of coming in with that, yeah, that's not how a lot of people think, but we can help people like that think like that around us. We can make a difference. I used to want to make a huge difference in the world. I used to think I can go out and talk about these things and everyone will don't. What I've realised is to be really impactful as a therapist, work with one person at a time, and they do change. And then they change people around them, and you just feel like a pond. It's amazing. Andy says, touching on what I said before, I've really been trying to work on the fact that it's down to me to look after me and not to be feeling guilty of treating myself. Yes, so do it more. Treat yourself, have some lovely things. Of course, it's also about affordability, but treating isn't just about money. Treating is taking time in a bath, taking time in a shower. It's taking 10 minutes to get out of bed sometimes. It's, putting something on. It's going for a walk. It's connecting with ourselves. It's really enjoying what we're eating or what we're drinking or the taste of something or in different ways. Now, there are lots of reasons why people can be emotionally numb. That makes a real difference as well. And that can be depression, dementia can really come into numbness, not having. If somebody is addicted or has substances in their lives, they can feel numb. That makes a real difference. PTSD, CPTSD, again, really big. Food temporal dementia is often a cause for numbness as well. It's down to, I feel, having half an hour and just go for it, absolutely. So it's really, we have to also be really aware. We can also argue that if we talk about any of the antisocial personality disorders, that they can create an incapacity to feel for some people some of the time as well. I wanted to get onto jealousy, but actually I've run out of time, so I'm really sorry. However, if you want to read about jealousy, I do have a big writing on jealousy, which is called A Fair Bit About Jealousy. But what I want to say about jealousy, it is a deeply feeling, and the emotion that it comes from is fear, and the emotion that it comes from is the fear of loss. When we are jealous, we're frightened that that person is going to leave us because they're doing something, found something different, better in a different way. And all people get jealousy in some way, shape or form. So it's down to us to try and understand what it is, because it's a massive set of feelings that really vary, oscillate between all sorts of different feelings. Rage, humiliation, fear, all sorts of things. And a lot of people say to someone, you're just jealous, when actually, I was writing about this earlier a little bit, they maybe didn't have all the facts, they maybe didn't know everything, or they didn't know things up front. People like to know things even if they're uncomfortable and make us feel safe. So jealousy is a myriad of feelings, and it isn't just sexual or romantic, it's huge. And envy and jealousy are very different as well. Jealousy involves a rival in some way, shape or form where you might lose somebody. So what it is a massive fear of loss. So what we need to do is communicate our emotions and our feelings and tell someone else how we're feeling and let them help soothe. Whereas if we just act with disdain or disgust or contempt, we were talking about earlier about the Gottman's theory around the four horsemen as well, fucking hell, you're just jealous. Inappropriate response. Gosh, you sound like you're really frightened. How can I help you feel more secure? And I still go back to a technique that I love, and that is that we are safe. We are safe. I'm not going anywhere. Let's talk about this. And that can really help as well. So, again, please have a look at that writing if you're on FetLife. If you want to learn a shit ton about jealousy, it's called A Fair Bit About Jealousy. And that will teach you a little bit more about that emotion. I really hope everyone's got something from today. A bit about emotions, a bit about understanding them, a bit about feelings, and maybe some different ways to deal with things to start with. Thank you all very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I don't ask for any money for any of the things that I do. You are always welcome to come along. I do have a Patreon and I do have a Ko-fi, pay coffee, as the kink shrink. If you want to, you do not have to at all. Please don't think that you have to. Thank you very much for coming. All I ask is that sometimes if you can, just promote them and everything else as well. People are saying really lovely things. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you all. And then we'll do another one in a couple of weeks as well. So thank you very much. Love to you all. See you later. Take care. Wank away. We look like twats when we do it. Bye. See you later.